Hello everyone, welcome to Psych, and today I want to talk about common communication styles between the personality types. I think there's 4 distinct temperament styles of communication within the 16 types that are represented by the first and last letter of each type. So that is to say, EJs, EPs, IJs, and IPs have different communication styles on average, and that's what I want to talk about. Let's get into it. So the first thing I want to make absolutely clear before we start this video is that these represent patterns that I've seen within personality types and communication styles. These are in no way deterministic of someone's type, and you should not view these communication styles as being a single factor that's going to help you find your type or find someone else's type. These are just common patterns that I've seen working with individuals in my typology business and as someone who's been interested in typology for a few years. So why do the temperaments of EJ, IJ, EP, and IP show you how someone is likely to communicate? Well, in my opinion, it's because it shows you their extroverted function and where it is within their function stack. Take, for example, EJs have a dominant extroverted judging function, while IJs have a secondary extroverted judging function. EPs have a dominant extroverted perceiving function, while IPs have a secondary extroverted perceiving function. The placement of their preferred extroverted function is going to determine how they're likely to communicate with another person. Let's first start with the EJs. This is going to be any type that leads with a dominant extroverted judging function, such as an ENTJ or an ESFJ. These types have what I call an overt controlling communication style, which sounds a lot meaner than it actually is. What happens with the EJs is that they're actively aware of how a conversation is playing out and who is in control of the conversation. EJ types either like to take direct control of the conversation itself, or they like to make sure that the emotional level of the conversation is flowing smoothly and staying to a point where everyone's going to be comfortable if they're an FE type compared to a TE type. EJ types specifically don't like to waste time when it comes to communication. They want to tell you exactly what they're expecting from you, and they want to know what is expected from them when they're speaking with someone, which is why they like to have communication partners who can speak quickly to them and get to the point of things as quickly as possible, because that's how they are in turn going to communicate with the other person. I have an ENTJ uncle, for example, who is what you would expect of an ENTJ. He is a 5-star hotel manager. He has a 6-figure salary, all the things that you would expect from a stereotypical ENTJ who's done pretty well in life. Whenever I see him over holidays or a few times throughout the year, the first thing he'll do when he sees me is he'll ask me, what have I been working on? What are my plans for the future? How do I want to achieve those plans? And it's one after the other. He's directly getting to the point of everything that he wants out of the conversation. And then after that, the conversation's over. The manager I used to have at my old retail job was an ESTJ, and we used to joke that he would have a response to your response before you'd even given it. He'd walk into a room, point out something that he didn't think was right or wasn't done as well as he wanted it to be done, and before you even spoke up, he was responding in a way as if he already knew what you were going to say. And it's because EJs like to get to the point quickly. They don't like to waste time. If they already know what you're going to say, they're going to point that out to you. Because to EJs, it's very important to get things across quickly and get to the root of the conversation itself. Now, things are going to be a little bit different if you're talking to an extroverted feeling EJ, because extroverted feeling EJs are going to be a little bit more lenient when it comes to giving the reins of communication over to somebody else. They're going to be a little bit more patient because they want to make sure that the emotional level of the conversation is staying at a level that they think is good. They want everybody to be as happy as possible given the current situation. So they're not going to be the types who are going to be pointing out mistakes and getting to the point directly if they think it might hurt the other person's feeling or bring the general morale of the conversation down. Let's go ahead and move on to IJ types. So this is going to be any type that leads with a dominant introverted perceiving function, such as introverted sensing or introverted intuition. Now, these types have a communication style very similar to EJs, but it's a little bit on the more passive side. I call this communication style responsive confident compared to overt controlling. And the reason I call it responsive confident is because, unlike the EJs, IJs lead with a perceiving function, and thus they kind of want to stop and process information before they give their response. So they're not going to be as quick to respond on average as the EJ types. And they're also not going to like to take the reins of communication as much as the EJ type either. To use an example here, think of a talking stick that is typically used in something like a group therapy session. When someone's holding the talking stick, it's their turn to talk and no one else is supposed to be talking. An EJ type is going to be the type who wants to have the talking stick as often as possible. They are going to be the ones who want to be directing the conversation. Now, an IJ, on the other hand, is going to be completely comfortable holding the talking stick on average, but they're going to be the type who take the stick from the other person, they say what they need to say as quickly as possible, and then they give it back. And this is the main difference between an EJ type and an IJ type and how they're going to be likely to communicate. The IJ type is going to not want to communicate as often, but they're typically going to be types who communicate in a very short and to the point way as well. Because IJ types lead with an introverted perceiving function, they're also going to be types that are fairly confident in the responses that they give. And that's because these extroverted judging responses come from a place of introverted perceiving. They come from a place of subjectivity or inner knowing. So it's not very often that you're going to find an IJ speaking when they don't know what it is that they need to say or the thing that they need to know. They're going to be the types who typically keep their mouth shut if they don't know something, because they have to process things internally before they give their response. They need things to make sense for them on a very deep and internal level before they're going to be willing to communicate that with someone else. In Gifts Differing, the book by Myers-Briggs herself, she makes note that, as with all introverts, the outward personality of the introverted perceiving type is strongly influenced by their auxiliary process. And this is because introverted perceiving types have a secondary extroverted judging function. The thing that they show the outside world is extroverted judging, which is why it's common for people to mistype introverted judging types as extroverted judging types, because they're not going to be the types who are going to come out and speak often, but when they do, it's going to be very similar to how an EJ would likely speak. Let's move on to the EP types. This is going to be ESFPs, ENTPs, any type that has dominant extroverted perceiving. So these types have what I call an engaging, curious communication style. And what this means is that they're likely to seek out and engage in new conversations and communications, and they're going to be very curious about the topics that they're talking about. But unlike the EJ types, the EP types don't have this desire to control the conversation. They instead want to explore within the conversation and kind of learn all that they can about the topics that they're discussing while kind of actively interacting with them. It's very common for EP types to say that they prefer to learn by doing, compared to types who maybe prefer to mentally practice before they do something. And this is because EP types have a dominant extroverted perceiving function and a secondary introverted judging function. They like to process things internally via their judging function and build that framework the same way that introverted judging types do, but they like to actively engage in as much stimulus and things that they can to build up their framework. They want to have a wide variety of information, and they want to engage with as many things as possible so that their framework can be built slowly by their favorite things. This is going to be specifically notable when you compare an EP type to an IP type. And this is because EP types value the experience more than they do the internal framework that's being built. While an IP type, on the other hand, highly values the internal framework that they're building, and they don't value the experience in and of itself in the same way that an EP type does. So that's going to bring us to the IP types. So the IP types are going to be any type that leads with a dominant introverted judging function, such as introverted feeling or introverted thinking. Now, these types have what I call an absorbing, analyzing communication style, and this is because their extroverted perceiving function is second. So when communicating with an IP type, you're going to notice that they often like to take their time and stop and think, and this is going to be even more so than the IJ types, who typically like to respond quickly. The IP types, on the other hand, like to really take their time to absorb what it is they're communicating, and they're going to think about it, they're going to process it, they're going to run it through their internal framework or add this new information to their internal framework. And this is going to allow them to build up this vast amount of internal knowledge or values that they have, depending on whether they're a TI type or an FI type, that is going to lead them to have a very strong sense of self or what they know. Now, the interesting thing about IP types, in my opinion, is that they can be very quick to retaliate if something breaches what they know within their internal framework. And this is very often found when you communicate with TI dominant types or FI dominant types. Because if you betray the values of an FI dominant type or you insult their identity, anything of that nature, they're likely going to quickly and angrily respond to you. Or if you say something that a TI type knows internally to be incorrect, they're likely going to respond very quickly to you. And that's because they notice inconsistencies within their internal framework very easily, and they're going to be the first to point these out to the outer world. Now, you'll notice in introverted judging dominant types that it's not uncommon for them to be shy or reclusive in their younger years. But as they get into their teens and early 20s, you'll often notice that their secondary extroverted perceiving function begins to develop and they become more comfortable in being playful. They lose their seriousness a little bit and they become more willing to engage with hypotheticals in conversation. They're not attached to one singular truth like they are when they're stuck in their introverted judging function. They're going to be more willing to allow other things to be said and these possibilities to play out because they're going to be able to learn from these possibilities and explore all the variations of the things they know. All right, everybody, those are the patterns in communication styles that I've noticed within the 16 personality types. In my opinion, it's really interesting to see how cognition can likely lead to certain behaviors. And that's the word that I want to make sure that everybody leaves this video with, likely, because behaviors do not equal cognition, but cognition can lead to behaviors. And that's what's really important. You can't say that just because someone does one specific thing that they are one specific type, because that's not how typology works. There are always exceptions to the rule compared to the rule being the one defining thing of a specific type. You have to be willing to be able to see how a person's upbringing, their culture, anything that's going to influence them and their entire psyche overall is going to impact their behavior. Because one specific thing is not enough to tell about a person's personality type. You have to really see what their intrinsic motivations are alongside these other reoccurring patterns that you're seeing when looking at somebody. So thanks for watching my video on personality type and communication styles. I would like to remind everybody that I do have personality typing sessions available if you're interested in working with me to find out your personality type and what that means for you. You can check the description box below for a link to my website, asurapsych.com, where you can learn more about that. This has been Asura at Asura Psych. Have a good one.